Scary story. Rain pounded the windowsill of the old apartment. Marina shivered, wrapping her itchy woolen blanket tighter around herself, and glanced at her friend. She was comfortably settled in a deep old armchair, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the bluish light of the screen. They shared Marina's grandmother's spacious but slightly run-down apartment, where Marina had moved only a month ago. Grandma had gone to her dacha until spring. "It's so boring," Olya drawled. "It's pouring rain. There's no time to go for a walk. We've watched all the movies, even that stupid horror movie. Maybe we can at least find some cards? At least we can play the fool." "I think the cards were somewhere in Grandma's dresser, but they're so old. I think they might fall apart right in our hands. And we don't really want—" Olya suddenly sat up straight, and her eyes lit up with a mad gleam. "Listen, Marina. Remember how we used to joke around at school? That thing with the pencils. Charlie. Marina physically felt a chill run down her spine. "Olya, come on. It's like kindergarten, and generally creepy. Why bring it up? Come on. It's creepy. It's just a joke." Olya had already jumped up from her chair, full of energy. "At least it won't be boring. Come on, let's try it. Just for a laugh. You have pencils and paper." "Of course there are. They're in the drawer," Marina answered hesitantly. She didn't like this idea at all. The apartment itself evoked a slight, inexplicable anxiety. It was old, with dark corners, a long, echoing corridor, and rooms that held secrets. Holding even a mock seance here seemed not just inappropriate, but potentially dangerous. "Why? This is utter nonsense. Come on, Marina," Olya finished, folding her hands in a begging gesture. "Just for fun. Please. 10 minutes and that's it. I swear." Marina sighed. Arguing with her friend when she was fired up by an idea was almost useless. Besides, a treacherous bit of curiosity had awakened in her. What if it really does work? And then what? "Okay." She gave in, trying to make her voice firm. "Only if something goes wrong or I start to feel uneasy. We'll stop right away. No arguments." "Agreed, boss," Olya said happily, immediately starting to give orders. "Okay. Bring 2 identical pencils, preferably round ones, and a clean sheet of A4 paper." Everything was ready in a couple of minutes. They sat down right on the floor in the center of the large room, and spread a large white sheet of paper in front of them. Olya, with an air of importance, carefully drew lines on it with a ballpoint pen, crosswise, trying to make the lines as straight as possible. Then, in the diagonal sectors, she wrote in block letters, "Yes and no," she said. She took 2 sharp pencils. "We'll place one along the line, like this." She carefully placed the pencil horizontally, exactly along the drawn line, and the second on top, perpendicularly, to form a cross. "The main thing is balance." Carefully, holding her breath, she placed the second pencil on the first. It wobbled a few times, but eventually stopped, forming a perfect but extremely unstable cross. The rain outside seemed to subside for a moment, and a tense, ringing silence hung in the room. "So, are you first?" Marina asked in a whisper. "Go ahead." Olya leaned over the paper, trying to sound serious, but there was still a hint of suppressed laughter in her voice. Charlie, are you there?" They both stared at the pencils, not taking their eyes off them. A second, 2, 5, nothing. The contraption stood absolutely still. "See? I told you it wasn't working," Marina said, already about to get up. "Wait." Olya frowned, unwilling to give in. "Maybe you should be closer or louder?" She leaned over again, her nose almost touching the paper. Her hair fell over her shoulders. Charlie, are you there?" And the top pencil trembled, slowly, but most definitely. It began to turn. Its sharpened tip crawled across the paper a few millimeters, and pointed precisely at the sector marked "Yes." Marina felt a real chill run down her spine. Olya jerked back, almost falling over. "It worked," she whispered, her eyes wide and her hand pressed to her mouth. "He's here. Maybe you breathed on him by accident?" Marina tried to find an explanation. "No, I definitely held my breath." Olya carefully moved closer to the paper again. She needed to ask something else. Charlie, are you a ghost?" The pencil came to life again, this time moving faster and more confidently, turning around and again clearly pointing at "Yes." "Wow," Olya breathed. "Oh, are you angry?" There was a pause. It felt like an eternity. The pencil paused for a moment, as if considering its answer, and then abruptly turned, pointing at "No." "Ugh." They both exhaled at the same time, feeling a slight relief. "So, he's not scary. That's good." "Careful," Marina suggested, calming down a little. "Maybe it's just some kind of spirit who's bored. That happens in old houses, right? Let's ask, is he from this apartment?" Olya was fired up with a new idea. Charlie, did you live in this house?" The pencil slowly crawled across the paper and stopped, pointing to "Yes." Now Marina really felt uneasy. The thought that her grandmother's apartment, where she now lived alone, was haunted by some local ghost, even if it wasn't evil, didn't make her happy at all. "Olga, that's it. Let's finish," she said firmly and decisively. "I don't like this at all, you coward. One last question. The most important one," Olya pleaded. Charlie, we can stop the game." They held their breath again, staring at the pencils. The pencil stood motionless for a long time, as if weighing something. After what felt like a minute, he slowly moved and pointed to the opposite. "Oh shit," Olya muttered, her recent amusement completely evaporating, replaced by alarm. What did this mean? It meant she just had to put the whole damn thing away and forget about it. Marina, furious with herself, with Olya, and with this stupid game, reached out to brush away the pencils. But before she could touch them, the top pencil slid off the bottom one, and landed with a loud thud on the paper. At that very moment, the old dusty chandelier under the high ceiling flickered brightly several times, and one of its bulbs went out with a quiet but distinct pop, showering the floor with glass sparks. The room immediately became noticeably darker. Olya screamed and jumped. The bulb just burned out. "Coincidence," Marina quickly said. "Old wiring. I told you so." She quickly gathered the pencils from the pile of paper, trying not to look at the ominous sight. "Yes and no. That's it. The game is over. Forgotten." They rose from the floor, trying to act as casually as possible, but the tension hung thick in the air. Olya glanced around nervously, peering into the dark corners of the room, and Marina listened to every rustle. "Perhaps some more tea? Hot?" Marina suggested, her voice shaking slightly, just to break the awkward silence. "Go ahead." Olya hastily agreed and almost ran after her into the kitchen, as if afraid to be alone. The kitchen in the apartment was long and narrow like a pencil case, with one large window overlooking the dark courtyard. While Marina, trying to control the trembling in her hands, put an old kettle on the stove, Olya stood by the window and gazed out at the wet, gleaming asphalt. "Listen, Marin," she said suddenly, quietly, without turning around. "Don't you think it's gotten a little chilly? It's practically goosebumps." Indeed, an icy draft seemed to waft through the kitchen, even though the windows were tightly closed. And it wasn't just chilly. It was unnaturally chilly. Unpleasant. Bone-aching. "Maybe the heating is acting up again?" Marina suggested, walking over and touching the lukewarm radiator. At that moment, a strange sound came from the large room they had just left. A soft, hot rustling sound, like someone slowly dragging heavy slippers without lifting their feet. The friends froze, exchanging fearful glances. "Did you hear that?" Olya whispered. Her eyes widened. Marina nodded silently, listening intently. The rustling sound was repeated, this time, a little closer, somewhere in the hallway leading from the room to the kitchen. Probably the neighbors upstairs, Marina guessed uncertainly, although the sound clearly wasn't coming from upstairs, and was too distinct for a neighbor's. Or was it him? "Charlie," Olya's voice trembled. Marina carefully approached the kitchen door, and peered out into the dark hallway. "No one's here," she said, closing the door tighter. "We just thought it was nerves after that stupid game. We're working ourselves up." But as soon as she finished speaking, the door on the wall of the kitchen cabinet slowly opened on its own, with a drawn-out plaintive creak. "And what's that then?" Olya took a step back, pointing at the cabinet with a trembling finger. "Old furniture, I told you." Marina walked over and slammed the cabinet shut. The hinges were probably loose, but inside, everything was clenched with a sticky, cold premonition. Too many mishaps in the last half hour. A light bulb, an inexplicable cold, strange rustling sounds, a cabinet opening by itself, and most importantly, that clear no to their question, "Can the game be finished?" The kettle on the stove whistled deafeningly, making them both jump. The sharp sound eased the oppressive atmosphere a little. Marina quickly removed it from the heat, and poured boiling water into cups. They drank tea in silence, sitting at the small kitchen table, carefully avoiding each other's eyes. Fear lay between them like a thick white sheet. Suddenly, Olya gently nudged Marina's side with her elbow. "Look," she whispered, gesturing toward the kitchen window. Marina slowly turned around. On the large, steam-streaked glass, someone invisible was slowly but surely tracing letters with a finger. "You won't escape." The cup of half-finished tea fell from Marina's hands, and shattered on the tiled floor with a deafening crash. Shards scattered across the kitchen. Hot liquid splashed onto her feet. Olya screamed and jumped abruptly from her chair. The ominous inscription on the glass began to slowly melt. "He's here. He's right here, in the kitchen." Olya grabbed Marina's hand. "We have to run." "Where to run?" "To the street. We can't just run away and leave him here." "Then what to do?" Olya's voice broke into tears. "I don't know," Marina admitted honestly, feeling helpless. "Maybe I should try asking him again nicely to leave, to apologize. What if he says no again, or does something worse than writing on the glass?" Olya glanced in horror at the window, where the last traces of the terrible inscription had almost disappeared. Footsteps were heard in the hallway again, this time much more clearly. Someone was definitely walking from the front door down the long kitchen corridor, slowly, heavily, as if carrying something heavy. Each step echoed loudly in the quiet apartment. "Who's there?" Marina asked. Although she knew there would be no answer, the footsteps stopped right outside the kitchen door. There was absolute silence, even more eerie than the sounds that preceded it. The friends could only hear their own ragged, noisy breathing. Then the doorknob slowly, creaking, began to descend. "He wants to come in," Olya whispered. Marina watched the handle slowly descend. The handle finally reached its limit, and the door creaked open. A thin strip of darkness from the hallway entered the kitchen. There was no one behind it, but Marina felt with every cell of her skin that someone was there. Invisible, incorporeal, yet terribly real and hostile. "Go away," she screamed with the last of her strength, not recognizing her own voice. "Get out of my house. Leave us alone. We didn't mean to disturb you. We were just playing." In response, a quiet, chilling laugh came from the darkness of the hallway, and then the kitchen door slammed with incredible force, as if caught in a hurricane, even though there wasn't the slightest draft in the apartment. The old lock clicked loudly, locking them in from the inside. "It locked us out." Olya ran to the door and desperately tugged the handle. It was no use. Locked from the outside. They were trapped in their own kitchen. The window looked out onto a secluded courtyard. Jumping from the second floor was impossible, and what awaited them down there, in the darkness? Olya couldn't hold back her tears anymore, her shoulders shaking. "He'll get to us. He'll come in." Quiet. Marina pressed her finger sharply to her lips. Listening intently, she heard a new sound, a vile scraping, as if someone was methodically dragging something sharp, maybe their nails, along the wooden door on the other side. The sound was worse on her nerves than a scream. "He's trying to get in," Olya whispered in horror, backing away from the door. Marina frantically scanned the kitchen. His gaze fell on the open spice shelf. A large cardboard box of salt sat there. Her grandmother had always kept it in a prominent place, and had told Marina as a child that salt was the best protection against evil spirits. A silly superstition, of course, but now Marina was ready to believe anything. "Salt," she whispered, pointing to the box. "Olya, help." They grabbed the half-empty box, and with trembling hands, began pouring salt. A thick, uneven line along the threshold of the kitchen door. White crystals rained down onto the floor. The screeching behind the door stopped for a moment. The invisible creature listened, but then resumed with renewed vigor. And the window, Olya remembered. It was he who had written on the window. They hastily sprinkled the remaining salt onto the windowsill, creating another fragile barrier. The screeching behind the door suddenly and completely stopped. The friends froze, afraid to breathe, listening to the silence. Had it really worked? But after a few seconds of tense silence, they heard it again. Laughter. This time it wasn't coming from the hallway, but from somewhere above, right from the kitchen ceiling. They looked up. A dark stain was slowly spreading across the ceiling. It grew before their eyes, spreading in all directions. And from this stain, something dark and thick began to drip. The drops plopped heavily right onto the center of the kitchen table, leaving shiny black marks. "What is this?" Olya whispered in disgust, retreating to the far corner of the kitchen. The dark liquid smelled disgustingly damp, stale, and musty. The dark stain on the ceiling continued to grow inexorably, and the drops began to fall more frequently, forming a sticky puddle on the table. And then, from the very center of this horrific stain on the ceiling, something even more terrifying began to slowly emerge. A clear outline. A long, incredibly thin finger. No, several fingers. Inhumanly long, gnarled, bony fingers, slowly stretched out, trying to reach the girls. Olya screamed and huddled in the corner between the refrigerator and the wall, covering her head with her hands. Marina stood paralyzed in the middle of the kitchen, unable to tear her gaze from the monstrous vision above her. The fingers bent at unnatural angles, curled, scraping the white of the ceiling with their sharp tips. There were 5 of them. No, Marina looked closer. 6 thin black fingers, glistening with dark slime. They reached out from the darkness on the ceiling. Something had to be done. She couldn't stand here. With great effort, Marina came to her senses. Her gaze fell on her own robe pocket, where she mechanically stuffed a crumpled sheet of paper and 2 pencils. A game. It all started with this idiotic game. Maybe the only way to end it was with a game. To interrupt the ritual, Olya. She ran up to her friend and shook her hard. "Olya, listen to me. We have to end the game. Do you understand? Tell him. Goodbye." "But he doesn't want to," he said. "No," Olya cried, not taking her eyes off him. "We'll make him. Marina quickly pulled the crumpled sheets of paper and pencils out of her pocket. She needed to call him again and say, "Goodbye. There's no other way out right now." She hastily straightened the crumpled sheet of paper on a clean patch of floor, away from the vile liquid dripping from the ceiling. With trembling fingers, she placed one pencil at the intersection of the line, carefully placed the second on top. "Speak," Marina almost commanded, looking at her friend. "Speak. Charlie. Charlie. Goodbye." Olya crawled on her knees to the sheet of paper and, looking at the motionless pencils, said in a trembling voice, "Charlie. Charlie. Goodbye." The pencil didn't move an inch. The fingers on the ceiling slowly moved again, threateningly curving and lowering. "It's not working," Olya whispered desperately. Again, Marina insisted, louder, more confidently, so he could hear. "Charlie. Charlie. Goodbye." They both stared breathlessly at the pencils, and the top pencil trembled. It came to life, and slowly, painfully, slowly crawled toward the nose sector. It had almost reached it. Its tip was already brushing the letter H. Without a second's hesitation, she abruptly snatched both pencils from the sheet of paper and, with a mighty shove, snapped them in half. At that very moment, a deafening, inhuman shriek erupted. It came from everywhere simultaneously, from the ceiling and the walls, from beneath the floor. The entire kitchen shook, as if in an earthquake. Old plaster rained down from the ceiling. The dark spot on the ceiling, and the eerie fingers instantly vanished, as if they had been a hallucination. The drops stopped falling, the scraping noise behind the door ceased, and a deafening, ear-ringing silence descended. Only the rain continued its monotonous patter on the kitchen glass. The friends sat in horror. Marina slowly formed a fist. In her sweaty palm lay 4 jagged pieces of pencils, and a piece of paper, crumpled beyond recognition. "It's gone," Olya finally whispered after a long while. Her voice was hoarse and barely audible. "I don't know," Marina whispered back. She listened to the sounds of the apartment. It was quiet, but the icy chill they'd felt earlier seemed to have truly receded. The air had become warmer. With difficulty, supporting each other, they carefully rose to their feet and approached the kitchen door. Marina pushed it hesitantly. The door swung open easily, and without a creak. The lock was unlocked. The hallway was empty and illuminated by dim light. They left the kitchen, tiptoeing, as if afraid to disturb the silence. They looked around the large room. Everything was in its place. No trace of the recent nightmare. "We need to remove the sheet and the debris," Marina said firmly, pointing to the terrifying artifacts in her hand. "This can't be left in the house. It needs to be thrown out, and as far away as possible." They found a thick black garbage bag in the kitchen, and carefully placed the crumpled paper and all 4 pencil fragments inside. Marina decided not to leave the bag in the house until morning, and to take out the trash right away. They threw on their jackets, descended the dark stairs, pushed open the heavy front door, and stepped out into the courtyard. The cold rain immediately soaked them to the skin. Marina ran to the rusty trash container, tossed the black bag inside, and slammed the heavy metal lid shut with all her might. They quickly returned to the entrance hall. As they climbed the stairs to the second floor, Marina suddenly stopped abruptly. "Wait," she whispered to Olya. "Do you hear that?" Olya listened, straining her ears. From above on their landing, came a quiet but distinct sound, a thin creaking sound, like someone slowly swinging on an old swing, or a pendulum. Holding their breath, they slowly, step by step, climbed the last flight. There was no one in the dimly lit area outside Marina's apartment door, but the sound continued, a quiet, rhythmic, maddening creak. Their gaze fell simultaneously on the apartment door. Hanging neatly from the doorknob by a thin black thread was a small, sharply sharpened piece of a pencil, one of the ones they had just thrown away. It swung slowly from side to side like a pendulum, emitting that same quiet, monotonous creak, its movement seeming to point first one way, then the other, to where, on an imaginary piece of paper, the words yes and no. The friends froze in place. The cold, clammy terror that had seemed to recede once again gripped them hand and foot. It hadn't gone away. It was still here, close by, and it was waiting for its next game.